Ramadan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the program. And of course, right now it is Palestine Ramadan Radio. And joining me now is Noor Ahmad. She's the head coordinator of the Palestine Solidarity Alliance, PSA. And she's also a feminist, intersectional youth activist. And she's going to be giving us an update on the PSA's Ramadan program. And of course, what's going on in Masjid al Aqsa. Without further ado, Noor Ahmad joins us now. Assalamu alaikum, Noor. Welcome to the program.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so grateful to the PSA for this Palestine Ramadan radio. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to go so in depth in the situation in Palestine. Of course, today it's very very topical as it has been for the last few days. Um, let's get your response to what is going on right now in Masjid al Aqsa. It seems it's that perennial battle between the IDF and the defenders of Masjid al-Aqsa, which are the youth, the Palestinian youth themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the situation there is very dire. We've
Mm,
seen, as we see every single year, just continued aggression against the Palestinian people at the hands of the Israeli apartheid regime. As you know, we are in the holy month of Ramadan, and it's a month which has so much significance and importance to Palestinians, to Muslims, and we also saw a sort of intersecting of the different Abrahamic faiths in terms of importance, religious days. So we had Passover, we had Easter, and we know that it's not just Muslim Palestinians; it's also Christian and Jewish Palestinians who are also suffering. So a very holy and religious period was unfortunately marked by continued violence and aggression at the hands of the Israeli authorities.
hmm And there's quite a lot of footage that that's been sent out there and it's been shared on social media. I want to zero in on one particular incident that caught my mind, and we saw the Israeli Defense Force trying to clear Masjid al-Aqsa compound of any Muslim worshippers, and there was a lady that was just standing there minding her own business, and there comes the Israeli soldier from nowhere and beating her up and continuing on his journey. It was so cowardly. Number one, I couldn't believe I was seeing that. But is there a level of misogynistic behavior in terms of the way the Israeli Defense Force treat Palestinian women?
Definitely. I think what it does is it really highlights and shows us that Israel is very indiscriminate in its violence and that they target who they want to. And that, when we have mainstream media sort of report on Palestine, it's usually in a very skewed and biased way. Firstly, they call it a conflict
Mm,
when it's clearly not. But you also just then need to be mindful of the reports that come out of that, because Israel might say, oh, we were targeting, I think they've used this narrative in the past about targeting Hamas, or we're targeting, there was someone who was like a terrorist in this building, that's why we bombed it. So I think it just is further proof that Israel is very indiscriminate in the way that they operate and in the way that they treat Palestinians, and that we need to take the reports that come out of Israel with a pinch of salt, a grain of salt, and be very mindful of what the truth is and what is actually being what's being like portrayed.
mhm,
So definitely a very misogynistic factor to it. Women, children are repeatedly terrorized, and Israel is the only sort of state. Well, it's an illegitimate state, but it's the only state that actually tries children in military courts. So they don't.
mm.
There's no sort of like protection of rights of vulnerable groups.
hmm we were talking about the intersectionality of the various issues when it comes to the struggle of the Palestinian people. Off the bat, can you think of some that we might just, be very, very, that's important for us to take note of?
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Mm,
Intersectionality is so incredibly important, and it's based on believing that all of our struggles are interconnected. We
right.
don't live in a vacuum, and the fight against oppressive systems is essentially all encompassing. So, Palestine is not just a religious issue; it's a human rights issue. It's a feminist issue. There's student struggles, there's worker struggles and workers' rights, and fights against capitalism and exploitation. the parallels to which can be drawn directly between South Africa and Palestine when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to clover. The clover workers are still on strike and for about 5 months now, going on to their 6th month. It's also an environmental issue. If we just look at the current situation in KZN with its floods, it's an environmental disaster. And
Right.
who do we see suffering the most? It's the poor and the marginalized. Houses and shacks which weren't properly built because people didn't have the money to afford the basic human right of shelter. These houses were just swept away, taking entire families with them. So when it comes to Palestinians who are already displaced, if God forbid they face a natural disaster, they will be worse off than their Israeli counterparts who have more rights and more access to services and facilities than them.
Mm-hmm.
Gaza itself is an open-air prison with very, very limited, if any, aid which can be sent there. So if Gaza floods, then we can't even imagine the devastation which could result, which is why environmental activists who believe in a socially just and safe society and environment for all have to be pro-Palestinian. And, feminists have to be pro-Palestine because, as you mentioned, what we see happening to women in Palestine, there's brutal forces used against them. They're detained indiscriminately. They don't have the same rights. Socialists and communists who speak out against capitalist exploitation, for example, also have to
Right.
be pro-Palestine. So we
Mm-hmm.
can't really pick and choose what rights we want to advocate for, or like the groups or rights that we want to speak up for.
Yeah, I mean, we at the very core of it is the freedom of the Palestinian people. Let's look at world events right now, Noor. The current well, the Russians call it the military operation, the war in Ukraine. The whole world has come together and said, look, the Ukrainians have a right to fight for their freedom. Um,
Mm.
and yet Palestinians have been fighting for their freedom for the last 70 years. Do you think that the war in Ukraine will open up people's eyes to the hypocrisy and double standards that have been used over the years? Because one man's freedom fighter is one man's, is made a terrorist because of the media and the narrative in the media. But do you think this particular war in Ukraine has had people think twice and like, wait a minute, we've not been very fair to the Palestinians?
Look, if you're being optimistic, we would hope that that's what will happen. We've seen on social
Right.
media a lot of people drawing parallels between the two situations and saying that, you've seen the entire world kind of up in arms against Russia and governments so willing to take in refugees. And, we've seen different businesses and organizations already impose sanctions and boycotts against Russia. And this is basic stuff that Palestinians have been asking for about, this is the 75th year of the Nakba now. So we have definitely seen the double standard, but while there's people on social media who are talking about it, it's not enough. So just to give you an example, we had SABC a few days ago. If you just look at their news website, they had about 7 international news articles, and of those, about 4 were on Ukraine, and the rest were on something else. So there was actually no mention of Palestine or the increased aggression against Palestinians or the attacks on Al-Aqsa or whatever is happening in Jerusalem. So, like I said, if you're trying to be optimistic, we would hope that that's what would happen. But we also need to realize that there is a definite, deeply ingrained hypocrisy and also just discrimination against the struggles of people of color. We've seen that happen with not just Palestine, but any kind of POC group. So yeah, I think optimistically it would be really great if we could use the situation to open, but that's our job as solidarity organizations to say,
Absolutely.
hey, this is what's happening. Well, what you see happening in Ukraine is wrong, but the same thing's happening in Palestine, and to draw parallels and to use that situation to bolster solidarity and to raise awareness and educate.
No, on my way to the studio today, I passed by a shopping center and I bumped into a Palestinian man. And, he'd been living in South Africa for a very long time. As you know, the right of return is denied Palestinian refugees from wherever they actually go. And, I had a few words with him and he was very, very optimistic. He said, this is the year. This is the year that freedom is going to come. This is the year that victory is going to come to the Palestinians. And I kind of get that optimism from quite a number of activists. Do you also feel it? Do you feel that there's something about this year in terms of the struggle that's going to have some sort of a turning point?
I think, you firstly, like, you have to stay optimistic and you have to keep hope alive, because if
Mm,
we don't have that hope, then we've already lost. But I think that there's definitely been a very, very definite shift in the perception of Israel, and also just the narrative around this whole, we are not a settler colonial state, we are not an apartheid state or an apartheid system, is very, very, it has been dashed multiple times. And it's becoming increasingly clear to people that what is happening to Palestinians is apartheid, what is happening to Palestinians is settler colonialism, and they are being displaced from their own land. And you have, reputable human rights organizations that are now, I mean, it took them a very long time. It took them about
mm,
74, 75 years, but they're finally getting on board. You had Amnesty International release their report, which directly calls Israel an apartheid state, and this is the third report that's come out. So, when the first report was released by either Beit Salam or Human Rights Watch, you could say that that's not very accurate. But if you have more and more organizations calling Israel an apartheid state, it means that it is. So we do definitely see a shift in narrative, and
mm.
I think as young activists, we always say that we want to see a free Palestine in our lifetime, and inshallah that will happen.
Amin, ya Rab. Just a final question to you, Noor. You are doing some mass iftar or interfaith iftars around the country in the townships. Could you tell us? Could you tell us more about that? What is spoken of there? Are you using it as an opportunity to sensitize people about the situation in Palestine, or are you using it, just to propagate Deen? Tell us about your interfaith iftars.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit of both. We hosted our mass interfaith iftar in Soweto on
Mm-hmm.
Saturday, the 16th of April, and it was, alhamdulillah, very successful. So I think our aim is essentially to, firstly, bolster like solidarity on the ground, but also bring together people of different religions, races, color, and for us all to gather together under one sort of umbrella of unity, and for solidarity for Palestine. So yeah, that was something that we hosted. We won't be hosting any more iftars, but we are planning something next week. So I can't really give the details yet because they're not finalized, but if you keep an eye on the PSA socials, it'll be a very
Mm-hmm.
diverse interfaith event. It's hosted by the PSA Youth League and PSA. So if you keep an eye on our socials, you can get more details about that.
Absolutely, can't wait. Thank you so much, Noor Ahmad, and all the best. May Allah reward you, and Ramadan Kareem for the rest of the month, and all the best for Eid, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Ameen. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. That's Noor Ahmad from the Palestine Solidarity Alliance talking to us there about their Ramadan program, talking to us about what's going on in the occupied territories, what's going on in Al Quds. Of course, that is very topical. And of course, why solidarity with the Palestinian cause is very important. It is coming up to 17 minutes after 5 p.m. Central African time. And in a short while, we'll be having our spiritual hour, inshallah al-Aziz, with Molana. Yunus is in the studio today, back in studio yesterday. He was on the telephone and it was not very clear. That's the truth. It was not very clear. But today, inshallah, he's going to be with us in studio. And of course, bringing our time just until before this, the Nasiha that'll take us until Iftar. It is the Iftar Drive right here on Salam Media. Stay tuned.